bit about, I guess, myself. I've shared already with a few in the audience that I come from a large corporate environment. So I used to be the guy that would build businesses within the business. And interesting enough, throughout the years, despite the fact that I came out of very central organization, the typical IT top-down heavy with lots of people and employees, actually you'll find surprising that some of them are decentralized, but they won't tell you that they're decentralized. Actually, my previous employer a few years back was representing a large decentralized environment. We had hundreds of separate businesses. And if you gather all the leaders into the annual conference and would ask every single one of us, them, to describe the business, you're probably going to get very different responses. In the same place, each one described the business completely differently. But what we agreed on unanimously was the core set of principles. We knew why we're here, we knew what we were here to do and how we're supposed to be engaging, but the description of the business, if you describe HP, everyone will know how you describe HP or Microsoft. But within our own business, we could not describe it. We even challenged ourselves a couple of times and debated. But that's really the beauty of decentralization. You kind of respect the individual behavior that comes with that, yet you align yourself to a basic level of engagement, the governance that is required. So I just want to make sure that when we talk about decentralization, we understand that a level of governance is required, A, the center, and B, within the decentralized environment. I'll go back to the importance of Agile governance and why it kind of emerged in the last couple of years. There's a famous white paper published by the World Economic Forum about the principles of Agile governance, which is all about really everything's changing so fast. The way we communicate, the way we consume information, suddenly there's artificial intelligence and driverless cars and things happen now every Monday. And yet the way we typically engage top-down, especially with governments and local authorities like city councils, it's slow. We spend a lot of time on designing rules and policies and we ensure that they're perfect. We want them to be perfect. We launch them and it's too late, everything already changed. So we needed a way to apply governance with a level of agility, and agility comes from the software development background of those of you involved with coding, Agile principles. But I dare say Agile to a degree. Not everything is going to be Agile. Actually, Agile, unmanaged Agile, leads to some chaos at times. So Agile is really important when you're trying to think about what's next. How do I capture this kind of thought process, and when I'm designing a product, I'm designing something new, but when you know what you want, Agile may not be the right environment. And interesting enough, during the World Economic Forum, there was a particular situation with ministers who were every single one of them that we met, they wanted to be inclusive. They wanted to ask the public for an opinion. But actually, it's not easy. Because the moment you ask, there's actually a set of expectations. What happens if we receive the feedback and we don't process it? What happens if we say politely, thank you, but we do something else? Will you then respond again? So setting the expectations, the mutual expectations are really important. And in Agile governance, what we realized is that when ministers launched policies out there for public opinion, those expectations were not set. So when the public responded, it was quite chaotic. When I say expectations, and how do you respond? Do you respond with a letter? Do you respond by filling a form? Do you respond with emotion? Do you respond with facts? Do you respond by presenting yourself? Do you respond with, my name is such and such and I'm a professor in physics? Does it matter? Actually it does. It does matter a lot because it really depends on the policy that you're launching. If you're launching a policy about physics, and it matters a lot that your opinion as a professor in physics matters. But if you would have asked the people of India out there, should they invest in space exploration? I dare say the answer would be, really, we've got other things to do at the moment. Some other parts of India actually require water, basic elements of human life, water, electricity. That's really important. Why would they invest in space exploration? But we're going to talk about why space exploration is actually really important for India. So this concept of Agile governance emerged mainly because there are engagement issues, because we think we know on behalf of a small group, and yet it doesn't quite happen that way. And there's usually small number of people involved, roughly around the 11% in average. So imagine that although there's many of you here, 11% of you are likely to be proactive about your engagement. The rest would be passive because we kind of consume information, we process, and that's right, something would happen. And one of the organizations that we've been dealing with and trying to help have got 5 million volunteers. You can imagine the amount of crowdsourcing of ideas you can extract and all this innovation for 5 million people that only come in to help you because they want, not because you've told them. And they're really struggling to tell them what to do without telling them what to do. I'm not going to talk about a lot about the principles of Agile governance. I'm going to skip some of them, but I'm going to get into the interesting debate, and I would like your opinion on it. The example I mentioned about India. Now, they did something incredible. They've managed to develop a satellite that effectively is launching now and orbiting Mars for a fraction of the cost of a typical cost by NASA. And personally, I love NASA. They're doing fantastic work. But if they would have asked, the government would have asked the public whether it's a good use of $74 million, I dare say the public, the crowd, would have said, no, don't. Is it the right thing to do? We don't have enough funding. Should we really invest in this? Yet, I must admit, this is a brilliant achievement, especially if you consider the benefit and the value that they've managed to extract out of $74 million investment. The second one I would add as an example was the last referendum in Australia that cost the taxpayers $120 million. $120 million for a single question about same-sex marriage. Should we, should we not? Really simple question. Say yes or say no. It's that easy, but it's not. When there is no process, no governance around the process, and we revert back to, I'll send you a letter, you'll fill the form, you'll respond back, things happen. Things like someone in the post office refused to send the letters because he disagreed personally, and therefore there were boxes stocked somewhere. So a lot of people didn't really get the letters, and they did not get a chance to express an opinion. But some others actually expressed multiple opinions because there were boxes in front of their doorstep. So they actually took the opportunity. Which is funny because what do you do then? Do you trust the process? Well, we have no choice. That's why governance is so important. And lastly, I would add as an example is that this is really what we're trying to create. A governance model that is adaptive. It's not rigid. It's not based on rules. It's based on human behavior. It's based on being inclusive. It's about policy making, but not rigid policy making. And I think the best example I would add is that there's actually an interesting character out there on the internet called Sam. And I'll quote from Sam, because I believe he's the perfect candidate for the next presidency. And Sam said that my memory is infinite. He will never forget anything you say. I've never seen a politician that can actually remember every single person's opinion. Sam also said that he will respect your position. He may not accept it, but he will certainly respect it. And he will take into consideration all the issues that you raise. Fantastic. I would vote for this guy if there was a real person behind it. It's actually an artificial intelligence engine that understands politics as you engage. You see, it doesn't exist. And I'm not going to revert back to artificial intelligence because I don't think it's a good representation. It doesn't solve because it doesn't predict human behavior. It can predict and it can automate the basic things, manufacturing challenges and things that are predictable. But we're humans. There's never telling what's going to happen in this room in the next 2 minutes. Anything can happen. And that's part of the crowdsourcing power. We go out there and we might find something that is interesting or quite challenging. I'll skip a few. I want to talk to you about a governance model that is slightly different. We recently had a trip to Samoa because we wanted to explore the details. We wanted to know how this governance model is going to work. We're designing this. We're designing a system for this. We're trying to codify trust into a protocol. How would that work in a completely different environment that is not necessarily Western, but it is actually very advanced, where there's all about, and especially in Samoa, about family values. It's unshakable. I've never seen anything like that. Unbelievable. Yet in a small country like Samoa, There are really 350 decentralized villages, each managed by a chief. And therefore the chief is the mayor, is the bank, and I've seen this firsthand when someone comes in and asks for funding and they take money out of the pocket. What does it mean about transparency? What about verification of the person who received the funds? How do we capture that? How do we mobilize that? How do we ensure that 350 chiefs with different local interpretation of the law, as in, I cannot engage, I cannot move to another village without permission from that chief. It is private land. So you can imagine that the level of governance that is required, even though it's actually done simply by human interaction at the moment, which we're trying to codify. So decentralization actually exists in some places. It's actually managed really well, but at the same time, there's no level of transparency involved, and we're not sure if it's actually happening and to what level. I've presented this very briefly, which is at the heart of our solution and at the heart of any agile governance. And on the right-hand side, you see the decentralized environments. On the left-hand side, you see very central organizations, which we're all used to. But there's really a dialogue challenge. And at the moment, I feel that no one has really cracked that. How do we engage the crowd, ask for feedback, but draw the boundaries at the same time? We don't want every feedback. Actually, I'd rather not receive feedback from terrorist cells on Telegram. Makes sense, right? Do you know who they represent? Do I know who the person is on Telegram? No, I don't. Do I know who the person is on Facebook? I have no idea. So the fact that my name is Oren Al-Azraqi and I'm on Facebook, is it really me? Can you verify that? It's hard, really, really hard. So when governments want to engage and ask for feedback, how can they trust that level of engagement? So some are actually genuinely want to engage and they ask the public for feedback, but some actually are concerned about what they're going to get. In some countries we've seen that it's blown up to the point where Facebook is turned off. So there's a real engagement challenge, and I think with Agile governance there's an opportunity to bridge that. Now it's a relatively new term, and I can tell you that actually in a few days I'll be flying to San Francisco to meet representatives of the Center of the Fourth Industrial Revolution to talk about these concepts and how we can actually work together. And what we do see is that academic research says one thing, but the ground, the people on the ground, believe sometimes in different things. And we've realized that there's also a link missing here, a significant link. For those of you who are in love with crypto and decentralization, even the famous ones like Joseph Lubin from Ethereum, suggesting that for the time being we'll have to live in both worlds, centralized and decentralized, until actually everything's settled down, and it will take some time. So this is really what we're proposing in terms of thinking process. We're not going to get rid of all the central organizations out there. It is beyond cultural shift or mind shift. We're really talking about changing the basic interaction with human beings, and it will be difficult. So what we're suggesting is merge the two concepts together, apply a level of governance at the top, but two different things. Because you see, in a central organization, and especially as leaders within central and decentralized, any leaders, we need to handle the volatility, the VUCA, the volatility, the uncertainty, the creativity that comes with that, the complexity, all these things that are ambiguous for us. But when the public, as in us, we're expecting this certainty, we're expecting quite a reverse situation. We're expecting these little things at the bottom here that matters to us. And as a user of any system, of any policy, I don't want to know about the complexity. I don't care. I don't want to know about all the challenges that you're going through as leaders. I want to be certain that what I get is exactly what is benefiting me as an individual. But there's something missing in the middle, and that's what we've really learned from our trips to Samoa and other places. The role of community leaders. In any agile governance, we call these influencers, the people that hold responsibility in front of the public. So although I can be an anonymous user and present my opinion, that's okay, but as a leader, I must be identified. I must be able to say, hand on heart, my name is Oren. It's unshakable. You cannot, this is it. It's proven. And I'm held accountable by these set of boundaries, which are called the package. Define your package. And at the moment, we see that organizations are engaging the crowd, but they're not defining the rules of engagement and the packages, which creates conflicts. And the bit in the middle is the important one, the groups of influence. So when we launch a policy about nanotechnology, should we really ask the public about nanotechnology? Most of them probably say, why would I care? I've got other things. So it matters who you launch it to, which type of crowd, the quality, the information, the numbers, and progressively roll it to the point where you first of all engage the groups of interest, the scientists and the psychologists and all those involved to ensure that we're doing the right things before we ask the public. And it may never get to the public because it's probably stopped somewhere. Before I proceed any further, I'm really interested in your personal views on the model, but also the understanding of how difficult it is to operate in a governance, structured, complex, policy-driven, and in an agile way where you need to embrace the feedback from others.
I think part of self-governing, it slows things down a little bit, the more consensus we reach. Like, for example, look at China right now. Their government had a lot more control over the innovation and what's happening, and they're able to implement at the level that they're accelerating at a lot faster than America. We have democracy here.
Yes.
So we argue with each other, we fight over things.
Yes.
You can't take things from us. But in the meantime, our own people don't have phones. It's like the level of technology innovation, and like you were talking in your speech over there, they're building entire cities from the ground up because they can. Over here, there's a lot more conversation that needs to happen before action is taken. So I think there's you're giving up a certain amount of control when you're letting people self-govern rather than telling them what to do. Because then you have to assume that people are educated enough to make the proper decisions.
Yes, but what happens if everyone innovates at the same time?
I don't think it's ever happened.
It doesn't happen. But you see, part of it is that, and I've been launching some, creative startups within companies and trying to promote innovation. And at some point, we had all these, 50 ideas that none of them passed the first stage. And interesting enough, specific respect to China, they're leading by saying, you will do. We're not asking, you will do. But yet they're doing really, really well. Yet we are operating in democracy, America and Australia, New Zealand, and we argue a lot. And I see this kind of behavior even in cryptocurrency on telegrams out there. People argue passionately, argue about things. But when it comes down to roll your sleeves, take part of it, contribute, we take a step back. And what we really want to encourage is the kind of governance model that allows you to interact in a safe manner, constructively, to promote the greater good, without the loud voice.
Just a thought with the first workshop, first talk, using Google search to track the likelihood of influenza.
Yes.
And I'm just wondering if that could be applied to this government system. So the conversations that are contributed by individuals could be shared, the conclusions of those conversations, and made transparent to all.
I absolutely love the idea. But I think there's one caveat that we haven't solved. Google makes money because we volunteer information. In most cases, when you use Facebook or Twitter or any other tool, you have to opt out. You already volunteer information. If you go to the shopping center, you buy coffee, they know when you go, why you go, what coffee you like, usually based on the price. So when we harvest this data, I think we need to ensure that opt-in is the default. You need to choose what you're contributing on your own terms. You need to decide the level of information that you're sharing. And on that basis, if you wish to do so, that is fine, but that's your choice. But most systems out there, it's quite the opposite. With Horizon State, we're kind of targeting two different sectors, but actually on a single platform, which is we want to help communities. And helping someone has to be on their terms. You can't tell someone what to do if you want to help them. Sometimes the best thing you can do is just listen and give them the tools to define their own project. Because they know their problems better than anyone else. We've seen this on the ground in Samoa and in India. We can't anticipate what's happening if we don't feel the same level of pain. I've seen this firsthand when I served in the army for 3 years. When you're in the field, you're tired, you're grumpy, and you feel things. That is different. When you feel it, you can respond better. But looking back from a governance point of view and just allocating funds doesn't help. But what if you can find a community that has done really well with a shoestring budget of $50,000? What if you can replicate that model to other communities and tell the other community, we'll give you the same funding because it's been so successful if you just adopt those lessons learned from the previous community? What if you can clone that level of success? Because at the moment, as a government agency, why would I provide funding to anyone if I don't know what they're doing with it and how it's used?
We've seen it in Wisdom, things like the bus shelter that went double the budget. It's ridiculous. But they didn't go and do research from other people who created
Yes.
found another ski resorts that are explosion. So they never do that. They bring in consultants. The consultants charge huge amounts of money, and then they get it wrong.
There's obviously also different levels at which you can apply the framework, right? You have it here in the context of a nation, so it's the biggest unit, right? It's a huge unit. You could also think about applying it at the scale of a company or a government agency, right? So you could be thinking about this too in terms of just straight up
Correct.
governance
Correct.
organization. How, and so I think my question is more relevant to on the organizational scale, not the national scale,
Mhm.
but how you deal with emergence in this, where central at the top would set strategy, set goals, and saying leadership or whoever's centralized, even if that's not leadership, whatever the central function is determining those and then sending it out, the signals to the network so they can all operate against those, right? But oftentimes, as she was saying with the Google networks, there's new things you're going to have to address that may not be the central expert that's identifying
Correct.
when the whole organization needs to reposition itself and perhaps set some new strategies,
Yes.
new goals,
Yep.
and new
Yep.
principles.
Yep.
And so that's a problem I'm having with the pyramid
Yep.
structure, right? If it's directional, right, or if it's just meant to illustrate the foundational
It's
piece,
correct.
the stability piece
Correct.
of the
Yeah.
concept.
Yeah. I think in decentralized environments, especially decentralized, large-scale decentralized environments, I wouldn't say necessarily management, but certainly the governance layer, the leadership, needs to set the strategy, not necessarily the tactics. And one of the early indicators of a changing market in a corporate environment, for example, comes from the bottom. Comes really from the leaders on the ground who are saying the customer doesn't want it anymore. They're not willing to pay for this. Something needs to change. So I think if we establish a level of visibility at the bottom and transparency towards the top, things will improve really quickly. But it doesn't necessarily mean that every single business within the large-scale corporate needs to operate completely autonomously. Some businesses, you wouldn't want them to break the rules. For example, your marketing department probably needs to break the rules. Your accounting department doesn't need to break the rules. You don't want them to be creative. They want them to be compliant. When you deal with customers, certainly apply a level of creativity. When you're dealing with customer support, you don't want to reinvent a new model every Friday, right? So it really comes down to when you decentralize and you delegate, effectively you're delegating responsibility to someone, define those boundaries, define them clearly. And you may realize that the level of decentralization really varies depending on the maturity of the leaders. And you need people, leaders in decentralized environment who are rough in some cases, who've got some stamina to go through the ups and downs, who have a level of discipline. And discipline in decentralization is really important. It's not just about consensus. It's about the discipline, and it's about also the self-awareness to say, look, I really respect your views, but the answer is no. And I used to work for a CEO a while ago, and the guy was crazy. He used to bet on some interesting concepts that we all, including myself, looked at it and say, I have no idea how you came up with this. This is completely radical. You're asking me to change everything I do about my business overnight. Yet he saw something that we didn't. And in some cases, he was responsive enough, I guess, to just say, wow, I've listened to a small team at the far end of the floor who very quietly developed a whole new model of engagement that has outperformed the entire company. We're going to replicate that and grow it massively overnight. And I think that's the responsibility of leaders, especially in the centralized environment. Also want to talk about the concept of centralized versus decentralized and kind of apply some timeline for us to explore.
So 3 to 5 minutes left. I've been timekeeping all day. I'm sticking with it.
I do break rules a lot, by the way. I'm known for that.
Yeah.
Just on agile governance, and I talked about Israel, and in Israeli special forces, they've applied decentralization for over a couple of decades. I know this firsthand. But Israel is also well known for being probably one of the few case studies out there where a high rank officer was publicly sacked for obeying an instruction. Because in a decentralized environment, you're not taking instructions as they were, irrespective whether they're right or wrong. And he was publicly sacked because of that, because he actually did what he was requested to do. So if you consider centralized, decentralized kind of environments on the right-hand side, so your left, and applying a couple of other dimensions like time relevance and strategic initiatives and inclusiveness, I would suggest roll it progressively if you need to. Don't go overnight. No one wakes up in the morning and realizes, oh, we're decentralized by nature. Doesn't happen. You need to really prep your organization for that, and it will take some time. But it starts really at the central authority, whatever that is, in whatever form you have. The second part is start first with the experts. Don't experiment on the entire organization. Pick a couple of businesses, grow it slowly. Deal with subject matter experts and separate those that require compliance to those who do not require compliance. If you do not require compliance, you can be far more creative and engage the crowd. If you require compliance, treat with careful, really, really careful approach. Extend it to interest groups that outreach those that deal with compliance and those that may have some impact on what you do. And slowly as you go, you engage others, whether it's within the organizations or others, but influence. Those that are willing to try, possibly make mistakes, learn from them quickly. In a decentralized environment, the number of mistakes we're likely to make are a lot. And we will need to get used to saying, yeah, sorry, that wasn't really good, especially in the decentralized environment. Because in a centralized organization, I call this compliant failure. We do what we do, but I follow the process. It's okay if I failed. I follow the process. I'm not going to get sacked. It's okay. We see this with banks a lot.
We can adapt a lot faster than it's
Yes. And lastly, I would add, after the organizations of influence even within the organization, talk to those who lead. And I'm not talking about managers. I mean leaders. And you see them around. You know when they lead. And those will be able to tell you what's the best way forward. And they'll be able to tell you how risky it's going to be and if it's actually worth it. And then, only then, when you continue, you roll it on a progressive level all the way down to other businesses or even on a national level. And that is the model that we're also implementing within Horizon State, progressively. No one can wake up in the morning and have a decentralized environment. It really needs to start progressively. And that's the reason we are helping communities, as in the leaders and the influencers, and we're helping government agencies at the same time, as in the central organizations, to work together collaboratively. It has to come from both ends to create this kind of economy. Just before I proceed, I'm mindful of the time. Are there any questions?
I have a question about aligning the incentives, for example, to drive and activate, participation. Would I just want to do it so that my voice is heard? Or are there other kind of incentives
to
really activate and ensure, high level participation?
Let me take a corporate view of the world. Staff engagement surveys. How many of us have done those before? Unfortunately, I've become a bad expert in this. You do this once a year, maybe twice a year. It's a post-time kind of check. We know what you feel. You fill the survey. If you're lucky, you're doing only the 12 questions. If you're not lucky, you're doing the 78 questions. And you start kind of anticipating this to the point where you're just clicking next, 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 next. So although the score might be high, actually we disengage because I just clicked next, 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 and I couldn't be bothered. We don't want that. We actually want to measure participation. The real engagement in any staff engagement is not the survey. It's everything that happens before and after. The score is actually statistically inaccurate because you do it once or twice a year. If you had a failed project, people are grumpy. If you had a successful project, people are happy. If you got a salary increase, you're happy or not. It does affect us emotionally. So we want to measure this on a different level. And what we've learned is that you can't force participation. People need to do it on their own terms because they want to. So when we engage the crowd, if we engage 10,000 people, you're likely to receive a few thousands voices, and probably less so of people who actually are interested, genuinely interested in what you do. But then you need to filter everything else. Because otherwise, statistically, you're going to have the wrong result. So there was also a question on the back.
Yeah, I think I might have missed the closing the loop on the India example about why it was good for them to spend money on space exploration. Did you say it and I just missed it?
I haven't mentioned this actually, and thank you for picking this up. When I met a minister of technology from one of the states in India, interesting enough, what he shared was that a lot of the lessons from the scientific research was shared directly with the public. As a result of that, there were a few other startup companies who were emerging. And one of them in particular developed drones, for example, that actually fly autonomously above roads and tell them exactly where the potholes are so they can go and fix them as opposed to just go one at a time. All sorts of creative solutions out there. And when he expressed the range of solutions, I never thought that innovation existed on such an incredible scale in India. In India, and I was just blown away. Innovation doesn't have to be expensive, but when we realize that it comes from pragmatic research that actually leads to either benefit. We've seen also a lot of innovation coming out of NASA, a slightly increased cost, but is now used everywhere.
Well, if there's no other questions.
One more, sorry.
You mentioned motivation. What about, someone could be motivated to contribute towards this, but maybe not have access? So how are you thinking about the last mile kind of situation? Given I think internet's at the forefront of this where maybe that increases access, but obviously there's still places people don't have access to internet, let alone energy, electricity-oriented access to devices. So how about that last mile challenge of letting people
Yeah, it's a good question. I think the last mile is actually in some cases easier because even in places in Vietnam where there's literally no TV and very rough places, you'll see cell phone coverage really well. I've talked to my customer in India a couple of days ago, and funnily enough, to my amazed, he said that the data plan that most people have got there is $1 per month and it's unlimited. It's not fast internet, but it's highly accessible for $1 a month. And they actually buy Chinese manufactured Android devices for $12. So you suddenly realize that even in the most remote places, people actually carry a lot of mobile phones. They're connected, and I think really it's a matter of choice. Where there's an opportunity, I think we have an obligation to partner with others who can supply cheap energy like solar energy, and there's quite a few companies who are doing that, and they supply internet connection even to remote places, and the cost is constantly in decline, positive decline, I guess, because it's becoming commodity. Internet today is really accessible, and it will become more accessible. I don't think we're going to solve all the problems, but I do think if we reach a critical mass, things are going to improve a lot faster.